What a nice crowd. I was born in a very small town, as I'm sure many of you were. This town was called Edgewater, and it was 20 blocks long and 2 blocks wide. It was right across the river from Manhattan, but it was a world apart. In our family, we had the most kids, and that was our claim to fame. We had 10 children, and we lived in the bottom floor of a 3-family house, and we knew we had the best floor because next door we had the backyard, or the side yard as we called it. And the other tenants didn't have that. That was our yard. My mother had a girls' room where the 6 girls slept. It was called the girls' room. I don't know why that seemed important to tell you. All right. And of course, I bet you could guess what the 4 boys in the boys' room was called. More importantly, my mother, Florence, and my father, Ed, slept on the Castro convertible in the living room between the rooms, upon which they produced 10 children. And that's the miracle. Okay. They were clearly good Catholics, right? And that's frankly, I think, why we had so many children, right? But my mother was entirely the most powerful person I would ever meet, not just because she was my mom, but because she was who she was. She had a couple of traits that would weigh in on my head through my life that I wasn't even aware of as a kid. And the first was, of course, that she was organized. We had the most kids in the smallest quarters, but in our household, my mother ran it like a boot camp. Everything had its place. And to give you probably the most simple example, could you imagine getting 10 kids out to school in the morning and finding the right socks? So my mother, in short order, established 2 drawers in the kitchen. A boys' sock drawer on the top, which was previously a bread drawer, and the girls' sock drawer below. The boys were all navy blue, all one size. And the girls were all white, all one size. And so all you had to do when you got up in the morning is remember if you were a boy or a girl, and just grab any 2 and they were a match, all right? But that, I think, gives you a great indication of the way my mother thought. Everything had its place. And for anyone who goes into business and is going to work with more than one person, meaning yourself, you begin to appreciate how important organization is to building whatever you're working on. And so I had a great advantage in that I came out of the womb almost organized and out of the household, and I feel I could be dropped on any planet and organize myself out of or into anything, because it's just the way we were raised, all right? The most important trait my mother had, because I think we could have gotten away with not being organized in our family, but the most important trait she had was she was a wonderful motivator as a parent. And she had the most efficient way to motivate. She would decide on the birth of every one of her kids exactly what she thought their one gift was. I don't know what her formula was. I should ask her about it. But the fact is, she'd label you, and that was who you were for the rest of your life while you lived in her house. And so, for my brother Eddie, my oldest brother, a year younger, he was clearly, I see now, definitely a hyperactive kid, and impossible to manage. However, my mother labeled him a born leader. And so, when Eddie was in the side yard, starting to get out of line, my mother would shout down from the laundry landing where she was hanging her 8th load of wash for the day. She'd say, "Eddie, all the boys are watching you. You're a born leader." And he'd straighten out and puff up his chest and straighten out, right? A different method, but it worked. For me, my trait, she told me, was that I was extremely creative. She told me, "Barbara, you're so creative. You're so creative." And then in addition to the words, she put each of her children in the role of demonstrating why she was right. And so my mother, on a rainy day, would tell me to take 5 or 6 kids down in the basement. And she said, "Put on a Broadway show, include all the kids." And I'd go down fully confident that that was my role and I could do it. And so I would entertain and free babysit for hours down in the basement. All right? If it was a sunny day and we were out in the side yard, she'd tell me, "Go to the side yard and open up a rock store." I didn't know what a rock store was, but soon the rocks became potatoes, the grass became spaghetti, and I was selling in little envelopes all kinds of things that we found in the yard. And we would be happy for hours. And so I was able to come in and think, boy, am I smart. I just felt like chosen, special. I'm the creative one. And so at home, I was so creative and loved and adored by my mother, and I felt like a hero in a way in my family unit. But at school, it was a very different situation. At school, how am I doing on this walking around? It's really weird. I've never done it. I've always had a podium and stayed stiff, you know? Okay, but I did look at my butt from behind last night and it got lower. Sad, isn't it? Okay. Where was I? Oh, the bad part. It's got to be a bad part, because I'm painting around to these people this happy story. You get the bad stuff. Okay. By the time I was probably 8, I had come to the conclusion that I was stupid. Not because of what went on at home, but because of what went on in school. At school, I don't know how your school was, depending upon your age, but in my school, it was a small Catholic school, and the way you were taught to read and write was to do it publicly. So you stood up and read, you wrote on the blackboard the new words, what have you. And because I just couldn't learn to read or write until I was probably closer to maybe being in 7th grade, I learned shame in the classroom, public embarrassment, so that when you were called upon, if you couldn't say any of the words, you didn't understand that there might be something else other than the fact that you just were stupid. And so at school, I was the opposite child to who I was at home. I was the deaf, dumb mute who never talked because I didn't want anybody to find out my secret. Until the end of 2nd grade, when Sister Stella Marie, the nun from hell, who, by the way, I found out after I wrote the book, she died of alcoholism. Did you know nuns drink? I didn't. Right? But anyway, I was told to go back to the 1st grade classroom to get extra help reading, which was okay with me. I certainly knew I needed it. But when I went back through the hallway, even a kid knows when you're walking backwards, something bad's going to happen. And when I walked into that classroom, who was seated there but Rudy Valentino, not the dress designer, but Rudy Valentino, the Italian kid from West New York who couldn't speak English, Ella Maloney, who we in our day called her the retarded girl, and I was asked to have a seat. And when I sat there and couldn't get it, and couldn't, and my mind was out the window with my imagination, Sister Stella Marie said, if you don't learn to pay attention, you're always going to be stupid. And that was the day I realized what my label was at school. And so I hid my little stupidity in a world where people measure children so narrowly by school grades and how well they keep up in reading and writing and whatever the accomplishment is. A world that, in my personal opinion, has so little to do with what happens once you get out of the school situation to real life. Thank you. Now I move on to the juicy stuff for you. The night I met Ramon Simon, with an accent on both O's. Okay? I was working at the Fort Lee Diner. It was a part-time job while I was in college. And I could remember it like it was a movie. And I'm cleaning my counter again, and Ramon walks in. He was nothing like anybody I had ever seen in Edgewater. He had jet black hair, olive skin, aviator blue shades so you couldn't see his eyes, and a shark skin striped suit on with a tie, a real tie. I'm like, holy Let me sidestep for a minute to let you know how important my mother even played into this, in that only 2 days before Ramon walked into my counter, I was home whining and bitching to my mother about how unfair Nick, the diner owner, was. And what was my complaint? I'll ask you, was it legitimate? I had one counter, and Gloria, who I still hate her guts, had the other counter. Right? Gloria was a dead ringer for Dolly Parton. She had a beehive kind of hair, who kept going. She had a teeny little waist, and the most important asset, she had boobs on her that were like a shoebox. And Gloria's, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, well, maybe I am, but whatever, who cares? It's like not politically correct or something to talk about boobs, right? Imagine if I was a man, I'd be sued. Okay, back to Gloria, just to